Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
Well,
I'm very glad that I have exercised my freedom of speech.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on.
So
and that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
So you haven't sat there and I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
Gotcha.
You have got me. You have got me. I'm trying to work that through in my head.
Why do you think it is that so much of what you say is so very popular with the alt-right?
It isn't. And you don't have any evidence for that at all. Any more than the evidence that alt-right people watch this show.
Neo-Nite website, Saviour of Western Civilization.
Oh, well, that was all taken apart today by a number of Jewish publications, by the way, showing that, first of all, that was all satirical commentary on the part of the alt-right, directed at taking me down, for example. And there was an alt-right article yesterday published saying that I was a Jewish stooge and shill. So this is absolute nonsense, and I don't appeal primarily to the alt-right. There's no evidence for that at all. It's the proclivity.
I never said primarily, Jordan. What I'm interested in is why you think that you get the reaction that you do from the alt-right. Looking at the Cathy Newman documentary.
What reaction?
Interview.
There's 10 million people watched that and commented on it.
I'm talking about what I saw, and I'm curious to know what your reaction was to the glee with which the alt-right seized upon that interview.
I don't accept. Should we deal with the death threats? I mean, she had, I think, a dozen.
I don't accept the concept that it was the alt-right that was doing this. There were 10 million people who commented on that video, and about 95% of them commented negatively on Cathy Newman's behavior. You think there's 10 million alt-right trolls watching that?
We are challenging inequality. We are challenging the refusal to see me as an individual. When we overcome that, have at it, we're all on equal plane.
I think it's fine. I think it's good.
The pot is getting stirred here.
So I've got a couple of questions.
So let's your side spoke, so I'm going to go to Jordan, then to you,
Let's
Michelle.
assume for a moment that I've benefited from my white privilege. Okay, so let's assume that. That's fine.
Assumption.
That's what you would say. So, so let's say, here, let's get precise about this, okay?
Was that very individual of you?
Let's get precise about this, okay?
Let's get precise.
To what degree is my present level of attainment or achievement a consequence of my white privilege? And I don't mean sort of. I mean, do you mean 5%? Do you mean 15%? Do you mean 25%? Do you mean 75%? And what do you propose I do about it? How about a tax? How about a tax that's like specialized for me so that I can account for my damn privilege, so that I can stop hearing about it? Now, let's get precise about one other thing, okay? We'll get precise about one other thing.
Precise?
Yeah, precise, yes. And so, if we can agree, and we haven't, that the left can go too far, which it clearly can, then how would my worthy opponents precisely define when the left that they stand for has gone too far? You didn't like equity, equality of outcome. I think that's a great marker. But if you have a better suggestion and won't sidestep the question, so let's figure out how I can dispense with my white privilege, and so that you can tell me when the left has gone too far, since they clearly can. And that's what this debate is about political correctness. It's about the left going too far. And I think it's gone too far in many ways. And I'd like to figure out exactly how and when, so the reasonable left could make its ascendance again and we could quit all this noise.
I think more how we raise them, how we live, education, a sort of culture, attitudes form a human being, whether or not they are a girl or a boy when they grow up. And if I raise my daughter to become a leader, to be self-confident, to have a high education, for instance, I think she will have a good platform to become a civil engineer, to become a CEO of a company, or to become a nurse.
Well, that is what people who think that the differences between people who are primarily culturally constructed believe, but it's not what the evidence suggests.
I want to talk about oppression for a moment, if you don't mind. Sure.
I'm going to play a little clip here from one of your lectures so that we're really grounded in what you said.
You're oppressed, you're oppressed, you're oppressed, you're oppressed. God only knows why. Maybe you're too short, or you're not as beautiful as you could be, or, you know, your grandparent was a serf, likely, because almost everybody's great-grandparent was. It's like, you know, and you're not as smart as you could be, and you have a sick relative, and you have your own physical problems, and it's like, frankly, you're a mess. And you're oppressed in every possible way, including your ancestry and your biology, and the entire sum of human history has conspired to produce victimized you with all your individual pathological problems. It's like, yes, true.
Do you ever worry that saying something like that might create a false equivalency between different kinds of oppression?
No, because I'm not willing to view the world through the oppression identity politics lens. And I think the fact that we do that virtually reflexively now is extraordinarily dangerous. You know, and even if there are ethnic differences in historical oppression on some timescales, which is undoubtedly true, that doesn't mean that we divide people into tribes now and we assign blame for those historical inequities. All it'll do is tribalize us, and you can see that happening like mad in the West and in Europe right now. It's very dangerous.
I grew up in Toronto, and I'm just speaking from the perspective of someone who experienced, you know, like sort of systemic racial prejudice everywhere I went. You know, that's my framework. I don't know if it's neo-Marxism or postmodernism, or if it's just my reality.
I mean, there's arbitrary obstacles standing in people's way. Some of those have to do with gender. Some of them have to do with race and prejudice and bias and all that. But the landscape around us with regards to those things is improving very rapidly. It's much better than it has been in the past. And I still think that the proper way to construe the situation is to look to yourself as an individual. The fact that there are still places where prejudice is a problem is self-evident. People are tribal by nature. But we don't contend with it by turning to an identity politics view of the world. It's not going to help. And I see Trudeau doing that all the time. To return to your initial question, I don't think he has any idea what sort of fire he's playing with.
When I see that tweet from Justin Trudeau, I see a guy who's saying like, hey, it's great to see all these women out in solidarity supporting equal rights for women. And
he wasn't supporting equal rights. He was supporting equality of outcome. And he was the same person who formulated his cabinet. It was one of his first acts as leader to ensure that his cabinet was 50% women and 50% men, despite the fact that only 25% of the elected people were women. He selected his cabinet on the basis of their genitalia.
So when you and, say, Sam Harris argue about religion, you're arguing about fundamentally different things, it sounds like. His conception of what is religious is very different from yours.
Yeah, well, he tends to think of religious thought the same way that a smart 13-year-old atheist thinks about a fundamentalist Christian. It's like, yeah, okay, you're just not getting to the heart of the matter. You know, and I just finished reading all of Sam's books in the last couple of weeks. And as far as I'm concerned, he doesn't ever get to the bottom of the issue. He doesn't address the fundamental thinkers. There are some profound thinkers. Dostoevsky's one, Tolstoy, Nietzsche, Jung. It's like they're completely absent from, and the same with Dawkins. It's completely absent. All that conceptualization is completely absent from their corpus of works. They don't even have an understanding for the psychological utility of religion. And it's a big problem. You know, you don't get to be an atheist when the people you attack are like naive fundamentalists. And I have some sympathy for the naive fundamentalists. Just like what they're basically saying is something like this. Look, we have an ethos that's valuable. You scientist types are casually dismantling it. What the hell are we supposed to do? Well, the fundamentalists don't know what to do about that. So they say, well, creationism is science. It's like, well, no, it's not. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a point. Their point is there's something valuable here. It's like, don't break it casually. What are you going to replace it with? The new atheists wish that everybody becomes rational. It's like, yeah, sure, that's going to happen.
I just read a paper that said that mathematics is whiteness. I didn't know that mathematics could have a race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the thing is, there's nothing illogical about these claims once you accept the central axioms. The axioms are straightforward.
The world is a battleground of power hierarchies. That's what it is. There isn't anything else outside of that. And each power hierarchy generates its own internal narrative, including rules for what constitutes evidence that support and buttress the structure of that hierarchy. And because the hierarchies exclude, then it's in the best interests of the people who are excluded to invert the hierarchy. And of course, they also regard that as just, even though that's part of the incoherence of the entire argument. That's where they have to turn to Marxism. But make no mistake about it, this isn't accidental. It isn't people misunderstanding what constitutes evidence. Not at all.
And this is all under the influence, you say, of postmodernism and neo-Marxism.
Yeah,
but
well,
aren't those things two separate things?
They're completely separate. You know, and this is something I've been criticized for. Dr. Peterson doesn't understand the difference between neo-Marxism and postmodernism. It's like, I understand the difference perfectly well. It isn't me that's conflating them. It turns out that the people who push postmodern doctrines in the university almost always ally themselves with a Marxist viewpoint. And that is logically incoherent. But I would say the postmodernists really don't give a damn for logical coherence, because they regard that as part of the oppressive, patriarchal, Eurocentric view of the world. The idea that there's an objective reality and all of that, and that you can deal with it with logic.
You accept this oppression narrative without question. You know, 120
I
years
don't.
ago,
I don't accept anything without question. I'm just telling you a fact.
That's not a fact.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Women were expected to stay home and take care of the kids and cook a meal. That's
Women didn't have reliable birth control until 1960. You know, don't you think that played a role? Don't you think the fact that they didn't have reliable care for
Are you
their
blaming
menstrual
women
cycles,
for not being allowed to lead countries, to lead nations? Because they didn't
They were
have...
allowed to lead nations. There were queens in many countries. I think you have no idea how much this oppression narrative has saturated your thinking.
I mean, do you want a state with more regulatory power? Do you want a state with more surveillance? I mean, first of all, why would you think that that would be trustworthy when all the evidence suggests in the past that as a state expands its surveillance power, it actually becomes less trustworthy rather than more? And why would you might think, well, I certainly want someone looking into your affairs, but I don't want anybody looking into mine. Well, good luck with that, because, you know, to the degree that I have elect someone to look into your affairs, they're bloody well going to be looking into mine as well. And that just doesn't strike me as a particularly positive development. And practically, because I don't believe it'll work, I don't think surveillance states do make people more honest. I think all the evidence is the opposite. And then I would say from the individual perspective, it's like, I believe that the fundamental, what we got fundamentally right in the West, because there was a number of things we got fundamentally right, even though we don't like to admit that anymore, is that the ultimate moral responsibility for the state relies on you. It relies on your moral integrity. And, you know, it's not that hard to think that through. It's like, well, first of all, you have the right and the responsibility to vote. And we could say, well, that's not exactly given to you by the state. It's something that exists in some sense outside and before the state. It's part and parcel of your intrinsic value. Okay, so that's a decision that we've made in the West, that each person, regardless of their flaws, is characterized by a value, an intrinsic value that's so deep and so profound that the very regulation of the state itself rests on their shoulders. And that's really something. That's why you have the right to vote. And that's worth thinking about. The first question is, well, do you think that's a good idea or not? Like, do you believe that we are, in fact, sovereign individuals? And then, well, let's assume that you believe that we are, because the alternative is some sort of autocracy, right? It's some sort of tyranny. It's the parsing off of that sovereignty to a bureaucracy or to some arbitrary form of leadership. And maybe you can believe in that, and you'd like a strong leader, and fine, but you want to think that through. Because if it's not that, then it's you. Well, then if it's you, and you have to make sure that the ship of state is sailing properly, then the first thing you might want to ask yourself is, what makes you think you're any more trustworthy than the people that you're that you're despising or criticizing. I mean, if you are, well, more power to you, but it isn't self-evident that you are, and my suspicions are that it's not even self-evident to you that you are, because it's a very rare person that you come across. If you talk to them with any degree of seriousness, you know, they're able to lay out a whole litany of ways they fall short of their own values, not values that other people are putting on them, certainly that as well. And they can name innumerable ways that not only are they not doing what they should be doing, so they're falling short of the mark in that way, but they're doing all sorts of things that they definitely shouldn't be doing, and they know it. It's like, well, we're going to put that right or not? And my sense is, you know, I wrote a rule in my book, put your house in perfect order before you complain about the world, before you criticize the world. Well, what's the idea? It's like, well, you're the sovereign, man. If the ship of state is listing and sinking, that's you. That's your problem. It's your fault. You're not doing it right. You're not educated enough. You're not awake enough. You're not articulate enough. You don't know enough about history. You're not taking on enough responsibility. You're looking for other people to blame because it's convenient. And that's kind of understandable because it's the dispersal of responsibility. Who wants all that responsibility? But there's a huge price to be paid for it. The first price that you pay for it is, well, there goes the adventure of your life. It's like you could get yourself together and be the bedrock of the state, right? That'd be hard. That'd call on everything that you have. That would be your adventure. You're going to pass that off to someone else? And then what do? You've got nothing left in your life but triviality. And you can't live. I don't believe that people can live ethically, trivially. That's why I think the pursuit of the idea that life is for happiness is wrong. Because life is too difficult for that to be the case. Our lives are too profound, too characterized by suffering and malevolence. The world is too characterized by trouble at every level for happiness to be the proper solution. The solution is something like a heavy burden of ethical responsibility, the kind that sets the state straight. And then in that you find the purpose of your life. And so not only if you want the external monitoring and the surveillance state, not only do you sacrifice your privacy and invite all that invasive attention and lose your impulsive freedom, you lose everything that's profound about your life, and someone takes it from you. They take your destiny from you. And that's no way to live. That's the tyranny that we've struggled against in the West successfully for, I would say, in one way or another for a number of thousands of years, and with a substantial amount of success.